The Dogman in the old warehouse. Dear Scary Stories NYC. My father used to have a strong belief that it was fine to attempt to plan for the future, as long as you realized how fragile a human plan is. Now that's a convoluted concept for a kid to swallow, so he would tell me this werewolf story to explain it in terms that he knew I would grasp. The thing is, his werewolf story wasn't just a fable or whatever. It was something that had happened to my dad. He would answer me when I asked that yes, it was a true tale, but he never seemed to understand why that part of it seemed so much more important to me than the moral lesson underneath that he was trying to convey. This all started when Dad was a kid, and his father owned a warehouse in the town they lived in. Dad was very proud of my grandpa, and he dreamed someday of owning the warehouse himself. Unfortunately, organized gangsters pushed their way into the business and maneuvered my family out of any ownership at all. My father and his family lived in great poverty where they had once been bourgeois. Dad swore that someday he would win his way to the same success that his father had enjoyed, and he would do it the clean way, not giving in to any gangsters along the way. Moving to another state and starting fresh, within around a dozen years, Dad had attracted enough wealth to come back to town and buy that warehouse back from the criminals. It turned out that the bad guys had run the place into the ground and abandoned it some years earlier. Dad was able to locate the current realtor and pick it up for a song, sight unseen. This was a personal triumph that had taken my dad years to achieve. He was pretty excited about it. Heading into the now somewhat decrepit old warehouse building itself as the owner for the first time, Dad's secretary and an architect joined him in the first investigation. It didn't smell nice in there. There was a musty odor, but there was also the smell of life and the smell of death. What I mean to say is you could almost immediately sense that there were animals breeding and living inside there. Dad informed his secretary, who had a clipboard, pad, and pen, to write down notes of whatever he told her. For starters, he said, cleanup crew, and then exterminators. Some of the wooden floor appeared to be rotting, so the architect suggested that the two of them stay right where they were. Dad told me he considered standing there doing nothing, but he was too excited to climb the metal stairs up to the second level to see his dad and my grandpa's old office. Dad and his lady assistant made a lot of noise clanging up those steel steps, his Oxfords and her heels echoing loudly through the empty and cavernous, exposed brick interior. If anyone was hiding up on the second level, they definitely would have heard my dad loudly approaching. As the two came close to the office, knowing my dad, he must have been reminiscing about old times as they exited the metal walkway and entered this old, concrete hallway. The first thing Dad noticed was the wooden doors on the offices. He said it was almost hard to tell that there had ever been doors there. Something had been happening inside that place that was beyond normal wear and tear. Another strange thing to note was the absence of graffiti. Why would young people not invade this place? It would seem to have been a perfect hangout, but there was no evidence of humans having been there for some time. As my father and his office assistant proceeded down the hallway, a hairy, hyena, or canine-headed man stepped out of one of the rooms at the end of the hall. It was kind of a little hunched over, but it stood up on two legs and was just slightly taller than my father while in that hunched-over state. The secretary screamed and backed off, but Dad said he held his position and studied his adversary from only a few feet away. This appeared to be a man in many ways, and yet it was clearly some kind of fur-covered beast. It stood there, looking at my father with basically no expression at all on its face. Dad told me it had huge eyes and bright eye shine, and the blankest look he'd ever seen. As Dad studied the creature, he saw that it had hands, but more like raccoon hands than human ones. Clawed fingers covered in fur, same as the rest of him. The fur around its head seemed to be a bit longer than the rest. It made him look a little bit like a filthy, dirty old lion, and an equal bit like a metal dude with a mullet. While Dad was staring at the thing and wondering about it, he noticed eye shine peering out from the darkened rooms, up and down the hallway. Slowly, some other creatures approached the doorways and peered out, all with the same empty, blank expression as the one brave enough to come stand in front of the two humans. Dad told me that eventually the beast bluffed a charge at him, and both he and the secretary bid a hasty retreat from that warehouse. Well, the property became an expensive headache. Dad spent a lot of money to clear out the Dogman, who just kept coming back over and over again. They were never there when the city inspectors came, though, so Dad was never able to prove that they existed. As a consequence, he was unable to get insurance to cover his problems, and the stupid, unusable, infested warehouse was threatening to ruin his other more profitable businesses. Dad finally cut his losses and donated the place to the city, who demolished the warehouse and built a public park. And the moral of this story? It can sometimes be worthwhile to pursue ambitions from our childhood, but we should not expect the world to magically become perfect as the credits roll. Satisfying his lifelong ambition nearly bankrupted my dad. At the same time, the only reason he had become successful in the first place was in fact to get himself within reach of being able to buy the warehouse. So you could say that the obsession with that warehouse gave Dad the energy to amass his fortune. In essence, Dad was arguing for detachment because he had become so attached to the idea of owning that warehouse when it turned out to be infested with Dogman and therefore unusable. He fell into a deep depression that lasted for some time. His expectations of exaltation and eternal happiness coming from owning the abandoned warehouse were unrealistic. And that was really his only problem. The way he got out of that depression was by realizing that life had not let him down. He had only been having unrealistic expectations. Dad asked me if I had any questions about his lesson, and I told him, yeah, I want to know more about the Dogman. What happened to all of them? Where did they go when they disappeared? What did they eat? Did he collect any scat to have it tested in labs? Did he collect fur to be studied? With such a golden opportunity in front of him, what did Dad do to prove scientifically, once and for all, that the Dogman was a real living species of creature? Dad was sort of flummoxed and confused by my barrage of questions. He hadn't even really found that whole aspect of the story as being an important point. He didn't care about the existence of the Dogman and whether or not it was considered real. He only saw the Dogman as being important in the sense that he learned a lesson from having interacted with him. I remember trying to give my father the Reader's Digest condensed version of the history of Dogman sightings, or at least the ones I had read and heard about. He was vaguely interested at first, but quickly made his information overload face, and I knew I was babbling too fast for him to follow. The point, he started over, was not whether the animals had type A blood or type O negative. Dad explained that it was that he had focused his entire life on achieving one single thing. And when he did, the universe sent a bunch of upright bipedal hyena-looking so-and-sos to come take a poo all over everything he'd been working toward. And that it was okay that this happened. The only thing that was wrong in all of this was that he had been attached too painfully strongly to that dream. He had clutched it so tightly that it strangled and withered. When he finally got his wish, it was a warped, evil version of the original pure intention. I was like, yeah, Dad, but how long was the Dogman's fur? What color did it seem to be in the dim light? Did the eye glow have any tinge of color to it? And so forth. If young people cared about learning from their elders, the world wouldn't be in the state it's currently in. No, young people care about the Dogman, and so that was what I asked him about. My poor dad. He always seemed so disappointed in me for not being a poet, philosopher, businessman like him. He felt I was too materialist and too simple-minded. Maybe there's some truth to those accusations, but I'm not the one who threw away a warehouse full of Dogman DNA because I was bummed out over a failed business investment. The true moral of my father's story is this. If you're lucky enough to buy a property infested with the rarest mammalian predator on Earth, the Dogman, then here's an idea. What if you don't try to exterminate it? What if you don't try to drive it away? What if you study it instead, for the sake of human understanding, and for the sake of these creatures? But it's not fair of me to judge my father's decisions from back in the days before I was even born. Who knows how I would have reacted if it had been me encountering. The Dogman in the old warehouse. I need to get this off my chest. Dear Scary Stories NYC. When I was very young, in the late 1950s, I was sitting in our family station wagon, looking out the window, when I saw something that I've never really been able to explain to myself. I think I might have witnessed some kind of a werewolf, and I seemed to have seen people attempting to capture him and bring him under control. Here's what I remember, which I was compelled to lie about back when it happened. I was told that my entire family would suffer if I ever spoke to anyone about any of this. So I lied about it, and I've felt intense guilt for my entire life since then. You know, people and pets went missing back around that time or a little bit afterward, and I think it was the hairy werewolf-like creature who was responsible. Maybe if I had spoken up, those lives could have been saved. Maybe I was as responsible for those people and pets disappearing as the creature was himself. Let me tell you what happened to me, and you can tell me if you have any opinion about any of this. We were driving through Northern California back in the years before any of us even knew the word Sasquatch. It would be a decade or more before the legend of Boggy Creek would come out. Otherwise, we might have thought that what we saw was a Sasquatch. It was me and my friend I'll call Jerry, sitting in the second row of seats in the station wagon as we were getting it gassed up. My father was using the gas station restroom, and my mother was in the little office chatting with the station owner, who was her friend. Mom was from this area originally, which was why we were back there visiting relatives. Jerry and I both saw the same thing, and we both told the same story at first when people asked us. There was a small, white, one-story, nondescript building across the road from this gas station. Nondescript building across the road from this gas station. It was not a house. It was not clearly anything, except a white one-story box with one blacked-out window and one door that I could see. The two of us heard glass breaking and an alarm ringing in that direction. And when we looked over there, we saw this really tall version of Cousin It from the Addams Family climbing out of that now broken window. I think if this had happened in the 70s or 80s, we might have said we saw Bigfoot. But in those days, we called that hairy man thing a wolfman or a werewolf. Now that I think of it, the beast had pants on, dark slacks. It was topless, so that you could see its black, hairy arms and chest, but it had dark men's business slacks on, as though it were human. Or maybe as though it had been human, only a little while earlier. Out of the door of the little white box building ran a man in a long white lab coat who tried to throw his arms around the fur-covered hairy guy, but failed. From the other side of the building, a second guy in a white lab coat emerged, carrying something in his arms that proved to be a net. He attempted to throw that net over the hair-covered figure and missed. The two men seemed to almost be moving in slow motion compared to the Wolfman, or whatever it was. They would lunge and he would evade them as easily as if they were trying to move through jello, while he had no obstructions whatsoever. Having no supervision and no adults immediately there to tell us not to, Jerry and I got out of the car and wandered as close as we could get to the big fight scene from our side of the road. We could see it a lot better from our new position. The hairy man wasn't just fast. He seemed stronger than anyone outside of Superman on the TV. When one of the men ran at him, the Wolfman grabbed that man and flung him straight into a concrete wall face first, using his own momentum against him. He was faster. He was stronger. He used principles that I would later learn are the basis of Eastern martial arts systems. He was the perfect fighting machine. But what exactly was he? This beast man was covered in so much fur that we weren't sure what kind of a head he actually had. He could have been a dogman or a werewolf, sure, but he might also have had any number of other kinds of freaky monster heads under that crazy mound of hair that seemed to be sprouting from all over his face and head. None of our adults, including the people running the gas station, seemed to even be noticing what was happening right across the road until that dogman pummeled both of the lab coat guys into complete submission. And then he ran out into traffic, heading directly toward me and Jerry. Cars in both directions swerved to get out of the way, and I nearly got run down by one out-of-control driver. The noise attracted both my parents, who came to collect me and Jerry, screaming at us that we were bad children the entire way. I was never allowed to know what happened to those two men in the lab coats, but they were at the very least severely injured, and I'm not certain whether they survived or not. The white building was stained as a result of the thrashing they took, and it honestly was quite a mess. It was also quite a show for two young entertainment and monster-starved boys. To say that we became monster kids after that would be an understatement. But there is and always will be a dark and dangerous side to any interest in any kind of monster. There are those who do not want you talking about these things. Before we even left the gas station, we were met by individuals who ordered us not to talk. Initially, my father got indignant and told the strange people that we were living in the United States of America, and so we had a right to talk about anything that we chose to talk about. Mom looked worried as Dad gave those people a lesson in American civics, which they listened to silently. Then, they left without saying another word. Dad seemed to think that was the end of the situation, so he took us all out for ice cream, and we went back to having fun. That night, though, when Jerry was sleeping over in my room, we both got awakened in the middle of the night by a tapping on my bedroom window. It was one of those strange people who had told us not to talk about the hairy man. He seemed to have something important to tell us, so we opened the window for him, and he grabbed Jerry by his throat. His arm was strong enough that he was able to lift my friend right off the ground, where his feet kicked in the air. The man turned to me with a strange look in his eyes, and he told me very quietly, but very clearly, that all of my friends and family find it hard to breathe if I were to keep talking about the hairy monster. Panicking, I told the evil man that I never saw anything. He snarled at me that I was lying. He growled that I had seen the hairy man, and so I admitted it. Yes, I'd seen it. His point seemed to be that he wanted to confirm that I had indeed seen everything that I thought I'd seen. But he also wanted me to confirm that I was never going to talk about it. Not that I would deny it happened. but that I would simply refuse to ever discuss this thing that I would not deny happening. I didn't then, nor do I now, comprehend the need for that difference, but he made me explain it back to him until he knew I'd been scared enough to do exactly what he wanted. Jerry and I were both too scared to talk about any of that, even with each other, for the rest of the time we knew each other. I would even try to stop myself from thinking about it when it would pop into my head. I guess my interpretation is that I think those lab coat guys were scientists, and maybe they were trying to find a scientific way to create a werewolf. And maybe they were working for a government or big business, and that was who strong-armed us kids into shutting up about it. I mean, that's just a wild guess, and I can't say I really know for certain. I apologize for sort of leaving this kind of open-ended, but that was the way it all went down, and that's the way I remember it. Thank you for listening to my one single hairy monster story, because I really need to get this off my chest. Edwin Nepomuceno. He is just like our real friendo. Please join us in thanking Edwin Nepomuceno for making this episode possible. Edwin is one of our channel members who had gone away, but have now come back. Here to tell you about the perks received by Edwin and other channel members is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Thank you. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos, or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.